Greetings, YouTube. The book I read previous to this one, I didn't finish. I got about halfway through the book. It had been written by a rock and roll journalist. And I kind of tried to ignore the sexism. It was written in the 80s and the 90s, and that was just part and parcel of the rock and roll scene. It, to some degree, still is. But about halfway through the book, he switched from low gear sexism to actual full high gear misogyny. Which is when I walked away from the book. I couldn't finish it. So I figured instead of being surprised by the misogyny, I had expected the sexism. Instead of being surprised by the misogyny in my next book, I would read a book that I know would contain misogyny, and then I would just be prepared for it. And that's this book right here. I'm Perfect, You're Doomed. Tales from a Jehovah's Witness Upbringing. I love the cover. This angelic little girl under this umbrella of light and flowers and sunshine, and everything in the background is people fleeing from a city as it's being destroyed by the loving God of Jehovah himself. And this is written by Korea Abrahams. I think it's Korea. K-Y-R-I-A. Kyria. Could be Kyria. I'm not sure. I could look it up, I guess, but I didn't. And the upbringing was pretty much everything I expected for a really socially conservative faith and family to deliver. So yes, there was misogyny everywhere. Women are literally second-class citizens in the Jehovah's Witnesses. They have no power whatsoever. They are supposed to be utterly subservient to their husbands, and if they're children, they're just supposed to be non-existent. The boys get preferential treatment. The men get preferential treatment. So, like I said, I was expecting that. I was not surprised when the family is deeply racist, horribly bigoted against everyone that isn't a Jehovah's Witness, and believes things which are absolutely and utterly delusional. Now, I'm a theist, and I accept that there are going to be things within any religion that may not make sense to you. I understand that. I get it. There's nothing wrong with that. However, when those beliefs bleed over into the real world and you start believing things about other people which are patently untrue, which are completely and utterly provably untrue, all right? It's verifiably untrue, but you believe them because the in-group within your church keeps reinforcing these beliefs. For example, the racism was like that the Spanish-speaking members of the church had their own services, and the family had horrible opinions about them because, you know, those people just don't understand having nice things, that kind of attitude. But the mother in the book was confused as why did the Portuguese family attend the English-speaking service instead of the Spanish-speaking one? Gee, I wonder why the Portuguese family didn't go to the Spanish-speaking service. I wonder. But they had a weird thing about used items. Now, this is a used book. And according to the person that wrote the book, her family, and then all the other Jehovah's Witness families would not purchase used items from like yard sales and flea markets and secondhand shops, things like that, because it is a distinct possibility that those items had previously been owned by a witch. Now, I can grasp that someone might consider an object to have a spiritual essence. I'm an animist. Completely get that, okay? Stone right here that I consider to have a spiritual aspect to it. Got no problem with that. And I can even go so far as to understand if someone might think of an object as having a demonic presence, that stone, for example, and that they shouldn't keep it in their own home. Okay? The family, however, used those types of objects as an excuse to explain their interpersonal relationship problems instead of dealing with those problems. If you cast out the object, the problem will be solved, instead of realizing that the problem is going to continue to exist because the problem is within you and your inability to relate to each other as a family and as human beings. But the idea that all used items could have previously been owned by witches postulates that there are a lot of witches in the world, and that, in fact, you are surrounded with witches everywhere in your community. Behind every door, there is a witch tainting items that then get into the stream of used stuff so you can't have them. Now, if there were as many witches in the world, in the United States, as the Jehovah's Witnesses seem to believe there are, we would be in much better shape than we are now. We wouldn't have a Nazi in office, because I have never met a conservative witch. They tend to be radical feminists and social justice supporters. Okay? They're not going to be voting for the GOP. We would be much better off if the world was filled with witches. Sadly, it is not. It is filled, fortunately, with a whole lot of people like this. Now, they go so far as to completely belittle the concept of knowledge. People that go to college are viewed with suspicion. And if you spend too much time in formal education, you are actually going to probably not be able to rise in the ranks of the church because you have been tainted by worldly things. Everyone outside the Jehovah's Witness is a worldly person. And come time for the second coming, the new system as they refer to it, they are all going to die. Horrible, terrible, painful, agonizing, screaming deaths, gushing blood, burning lava, the whole 9 yards, which is taught to children. While all the Jehovah's Witnesses will be preserved and shall inherit the earth. 144 of the really fortunate ones will go to heaven, which is how the Jehovah's Witnesses justify or explain that 144 number, which I believe came out of thin air. I don't believe it's in the Bible itself. But they shall inherit the earth. So apparently, if this happens, I will die a horrible death. Some nice Jehovah's Witness will get me in my apartment and all my stuff. They will probably have to take all my books and burn them, of course. But they might be able to keep my tools and things. Because, those books behind me, they're all gaming books. Ho, ho, ho. That's an entry for the devil right there now, isn't it, folks? Also, they're deeply sex negative. And the author of the book was, as most children are, a natural masturbator. This did not go well. She was taught how to fear and hate and loathe her body and her sexual urges from a very early age. These people are evil. And when she finally got to a point in her life where she found interest from any man in really dating, she decided that she must marry him. And I kept begging and hoping that she would not do it, that she would find the break and free herself from this horrible social conservative organization, but she didn't. She married the guy, and it was horrible. Her first sexual experiences with a partner were terrible. She ended up turning to alcohol. Thankfully, she didn't become an alcoholic, and eventually cutting. And during her life, she actually developed not only anxiety and depression, even a suicide attempt, but OCD, legitimate OCD. She would fixate, like, I have to look at this object or I can't breathe. I have to count all the time or horrible things will happen to my family. I have to record numbers, otherwise terrible things will happen to everyone I know and love. And one of the most evil things about this organization is that if someone is kicked out, disfellowship is what they call it, you can never talk to them again. In fact, if a member of the in-group speaks to someone that has been through the disfellowship process, they themselves will then be disfellowshipped. A perfect mechanism for making sure that not one shred of the outside world gets inside this organization. And any organization that is that terrified of reality, sticking its little nose into their little safe space, they're in trouble, and they have an incredibly fragile, weak, meaningless form of faith. Absolutely meaningless form of faith. If your faith is that delicate, it's not worth a damn. Remember, Jesus left 2 edicts. Love your God, love your neighbor. That's it. Everything else is pointless legalism. And the Jehovah's Witnesses may very well love their God, though they seem to fear him more than love him. But they definitely don't love their neighbors. They barely tolerate members of their own church. They belittle people within the church who have legitimate mental illness. These people are kind of encouraged to get real mental health care, but if it doesn't go in line with what the church says, then it's false. It's too worldly. The family sends Kyria to see numerous mental health people, and every time they even get close to actually dealing with something, her mother declares it, falls too worldly, and she has to leave. It's horrible. Thankfully, she eventually divorces her husband, which gets her disfellowship. Ends up trying to deal with the world through poetry. Thankfully, gets her new social circles, even though the social circles are kind of pretentious, hipstery slam poets. She eventually discovers that, you can actually enjoy sex. She eventually gets help. I believe she stops drinking alcohol abusively, and I believe she eventually stops cutting herself. And cutting is a coping mechanism. It's not the best coping mechanism, mind you, but it's better than being dead. And she does it in a very controlled manner. I cannot say that I encourage this behavior, but it's better than being dead. And she eventually gets out of that environment and moves on. And the book is full of so many forms of hypocrisy and evil manipulative control methods. It's astounding. I shouldn't say shocking, but astounding. And the only thing I found weird about this, and this is going to probably sound a little strange, is that near the end, like the last chapter, I think it was, there was a tonal shift between 2 paragraphs that was so jarring. It was the most severe tonal shift I have ever encountered in a book. She's like having a conversation about something about the church. And in the next paragraph, she's discussing putting a used condom on a dresser because she just had sex with her girlfriend's boyfriend, a friend's boyfriend. Now, I'm not going to judge her for that. Not my life. But the shift between these 2 topics stopped me dead in my bloody tracks. I'm just like, did I miss something? I actually went back and reread the previous paragraph to make sure I had not skipped something in some kind of micro sleep episode. Nope, I hadn't. I'm like, did an editor never look at this chapter? Were they sleeping or high? It was weird. It was just strange. Other than that, the book was well written. In the first chapter, I'm like, this sounds like George Carlin. Her cadence, her rhythm sounds like George Carlin. So I looked at the blurb at the back. I was not surprised that she actually has become a stand-up comedian. As the book went on, the humor level went down as more and more of the revelations of how horrible the church went up. And the humor kind of remained, but there was less of it, and it was far darker. The darkest stuff that like Carlin ever pulled out, because Carlin was getting more and more honest as he got older. A good book. Well written, pithy, at moments funny, but heartbreaking again and again and again. One interesting thing is she discusses her younger brother, through the beginning portion of the book. And when they hit like the teen years, she just stops talking about him. And there's not like a reference like where he went or what happened to him, or why she stops talking about him, but she stops talking about him. And I don't know why. And it was kind of a mystery that I wish I had an answer to. I'm almost tempted to write to her and say, whatever happened to your brother? Because I didn't get that in the book. She has a website, which is KyriaAbrams.com. I actually haven't visited, but I have seen a video interview of her on YouTube. Good book, entertaining, insightful, and really profoundly depressing. But again, not shocking.